Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Rich Bates, the CIO of Zeiders Enterprises. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you being here. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until it's too late and the hacker's already done damage. A hacker's job is to bypass your security, so companies need a way of knowing when someone's gotten past their security. That's where CyberLink's intrusion detection comes in. With our 24/7 security operations center, we use a combination of AI and cybersecurity technicians to see when a hacker's successfully bypassed your security. So if a bad guy gets past your security, we'll know right away and be able to kick them out. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Rich, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about Zeiders and your work and your role there as CIO?
Sure. Zeiders Enterprises has been in business for 40 years. It is solely owned by a veteran by the name of Mike Zeiders, and we are a government contractor specifically to the Department of Defense, where we deal in quality of life services. Okay, what's a quality of life service? Anything that has or any job description that has the word advisor, coach, or counselor in it, that's probably where we play. So everything from personal financial counseling to clinical and non-clinical counseling, as well as, sadly, suicide prevention and intervention training and such like that. And probably the neatest thing that we do is we will actually embed family life counselors on board ships that are returning from deployment to help those young sailors get acclimated back into family and civilian life. So that's probably the neatest thing we do. So we have counselors helicoptering onto ships and transferring in between ships and such like that. And my role is really with all of the government regulation that is coming out around PII and PHI and CUI and all those other letters, I'm really turned into more of a policy wonk than a hands-on technical guy. So that's my concentration.
So CMMC, that is your new place to be. Not to be too Dr. Seuss about it all, but is that about right?
It's huge. It is it's not just the elephant in the room, it's the woolly mammoth. And, they've tried to make the program very, very clear and concise, but not so much when you're down here on the field. I think that the biggest, and I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers,
Okay.
but I think that the biggest problem is that they've given an awful lot of leeway to the individual program office. So I'm already seeing in RFIs and RFPs some requirements that just don't make sense, right? For example, a friend of mine was looking at an RFI. He called me up. He was like, "What do you make of this?" And the entire RFP was around, as far as the cyber went, everything was government furnished equipment. The PC was government furnished. The cell phones were government furnished. You had to VPN into the government system, all this kind of stuff. But they wanted CMMC level 2 with an external audit.
Right. Why?
Yeah. Why? Why do we want it? And what are you going to audit? You're going to audit yourself, right?
Yeah.
So it just made no sense. And what I fear is that we're going to see what I call portfolio building, where you've got a program office or a command or something like that wants to boast about, our portfolio has 12 contracts in it, all of them at CMMC level 2 external audit. And it's like, okay, but how many of them really, really need it? Right. So I think that there's that. I think that there's still, I mean, I understand the rule is out and you can read the rule, but I think that there's still going to be a lot of interpretation over the next few months. But I look at it this way, you know, they've said you're going to kowtow to 800-171. That's pretty clear. Thank goodness they did that. As far as I'm concerned, Ron Ross is a saint. For those folks who don't know, Ron Ross and his team authored 800-171, and we can talk about that why that was so important. But you know, if you follow that framework, if you take those bones and you put some flesh on it, you're most of the way there. But there's still some confusion about, can I use that product? Can I not use that product? There's still some interpretation to go on.
Well, let's do that. I mean, for those that aren't as familiar, let's talk about 800-171. Go for it.
Yeah, so I think 800-171 started to come out. I think the first rollout, I want to say, it was 2016. But before that, all we had to rely on was 853. And that is a beast. And it is specifically called out. You read the cover, it says, this is the control structure for federal systems. Well, I don't run a federal system. Right. My systems are not owned by the federal government. They're not owned by the DoD. And when my first encounter as a DoD contractor, where we had to have an external third-party assessment back then, CMMC wasn't around. We had to have third-party assessment. I was being assessed against like 478 controls. And I'm going, I'm just sitting here, and we ran a call center. Why do I have 478 controls around this call center? And why am I being treated like I'm sitting in a DISA deck, if anybody remembers those? I think they're all gone now. So then when 800-171 came out, starting with version 0.1, we were just ecstatic. We're like, look, it says right here, for non-federal systems processing, I think at that point it was still for official use only. It was right after that they flipped that over to CUI, and we went down to 110 controls. Now, I added back in a few because they made sense, right? So I think we've settled in at just over 170 controls.
Wow.
And so, but that does a lot of things. It reduces your overhead. It reduces your time to get your assessment done. The first time I did an 853 assessment was actually not in this position, but a couple lifetimes ago. And that audit took 2.5 months.
Seems about right.
To do. Now ignoring CMMC, the last time I did a third-party assessment with under the 800-171 controls, it took us about a month. But we went in very well prepared. And I think that when you're talking about, and here we vary off of the path we were on, but that's okay. When you go into an assessment or an audit, the more data you can put in front of the assessor or the auditor right up front, the shorter your engagement gets. You want to make sure that you're not leaving open holes for them to, rabbit holes for them to jump down and say, hey, where's this? Where's that? If you give it to them all up front, it's almost like you tire them out in the first quarter, and then the next 3 quarters, you just kind of glide to the end of the game.
There's an interesting, and I don't know how prevalent this is, but when I was in the Army, everything was always inspected, right? I was an enlisted guy, and so everything was constantly being inspected. And back when I was a single guy in the Army, you had your barracks were constantly being inspected, and one of the tricks we came up with was, if the place smelled really clean, then they tended not to look that hard at the other thing, because you can always find somebody. The funny part about the military is you can always gig somebody for something. I don't care how squared away you are. There's something that you're not doing perfectly. It's something could be askew. Your boots aren't shiny enough. Your uniform's not pressed enough. Whatever. There's dirt in the underneath that bed over there. Whatever it might be. And so that was the trick, was make it smell really, really fresh. So when they walk in, they're like, oh, it smells great. You've clearly been cleaning, and they just generally aren't going to scrutinize as much. And I found that to be very true. And it sounds like it's the same concept here with the auditors. Give them all the stuff up front. They're like, oh, you've clearly done your homework. You're squared away. Everything's looking really good. We probably don't have to dive too deep because your stuff is pretty squared away. Would you
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that's about right?
Just to add on to your story, I had one of my employees was an Air Force guy, and he said there were two rules that they were told up front. One was you always use disposable razors because they would inspect your razor to see if it was clean and hygienic. He said the other thing you did is you rolled your socks and Velcroed them into place in the drawer because they'd
Nice.
come around, they'd slam open the drawer. Your socks would go all over the place. Say, this is not. So he was like, and really, and if you think about it, I mean, think about it this way. Always use a disposable razor. Well, in your audit and your assessment, you don't want old data lying around because that's discoverable, right? That's why you have a data retention policy. And that's why you say, okay, I have a government contract. I have to keep this data for so long. It doesn't say how you have to keep it. So for heaven's sake, keep a DVD burner around. And then, you get rid of your old data. And as far as Velcroing your socks into place, you want to make sure that if the assessor comes along and they poke at this part of your system, that the rest of your system doesn't fall over, right? So I think that it's really important in that vein that your system security plan is not the end all and be all. It is the central document to everything else. But from there, you branch out to your individual policies and procedures. You branch out to, getting into your CMMC and such like that, your flow down documents. If you're using Microsoft GCC moderate or high, you want to get their responsibility and the customer responsibility chart. That becomes part of your SSP. And in that vein, if I can give a little bit of advice,
Please.
I try to keep my SSP as evergreen as I possibly can, right? You don't want to put in your SSP, here is how we do this. You want to reference a procedure that is someplace else. And the other thing that I like to do, another thing I like to do, is that your policies are in PDF just to demonstrate how permanent they are. But your procedures should be, when I ran the data center, again, a couple lifetimes ago, our procedures were in a Wikipedia, right? Because your procedures are going to change. You're not going to use the same procedures on Windows, whatever we're at. Windows Server, I think we're on 2019, 2020, I don't know. You're not going to use the same procedures in that you used in Windows NT.
Yeah.
Even though I understand the government's still running NT, but let's not talk about that. So that's just a little bit of philosophy. It's done well for me. As long as you keep your versions correct.
I love that. Actually, I think that's really, really sound advice. And I think that's very helpful. I think for a lot of people, there's not a lot of experience when it comes to, writing the SSP and the policies and procedures. And then how do you even present it? Or just give them a bunch of Word documents, and I love your evergreen approach, with the SSP. So then boom, you're just linking to the procedure. And, as that changes, fantastic. Great.
So two resources I'll give to your listeners. NIST has an SSP format, which is very, very simple. It's easy to use. To me, it is not as complete as it could be, but it's also not visually impressive. On the other hand, the FedRAMP program has an SSP format that you have to use for them. And it's great. I call it a delicate document because it's a Word document. And the old joke about Word, you drop a picture in it and you hear sirens and the demons appear, and because it messes everything up. But that format is the one that I use, and it is easy to fill out. It's easy to use, highly customizable. But let me tell you something, the visual impact of it we've had assessors come in, they just look at that. We had one assessor look at that and they were like, it's obvious you got your stuff together.
Nice.
So there's a couple of resources. You can Google them, and
We'll link that.
they're
I
out
think
there.
that's a great one. That's
Yeah.
yeah. All right. We'll find that. And if we have problems finding it, we'll reach out and get it from you, Rich. That's
Okay.
I think that's a great resource. And that is sound advice. If nothing else, that's gonna be a golden nugget for a lot of people because I think it's a real challenge, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that's fantastic. Now, let me ask you, what are your thoughts on this, the idea of an enclave, right? And for those that aren't really familiar, a GCC environment that's been set up so that all the employees have to do is remote in, so they can be working from wherever. And so you've basically got this environment within the government, cloud that is all prepared and done, and now you can just work from there. Versus the alternative being having to kind of secure, if you will, your traditional office environment where
Mhm.
where people are. Does that work for you guys at where you might have, like you mentioned, a call center before, and I know you guys, Zyder uses a call center and a lot of other things. I know for small, contractors where they might just be a few people and it's consulting or it's whatever. Manufacturing's tough. I would
Oh yeah.
imagine call centers got to be kind of tough too, right? Because
Well, yeah, we're blessing and a curse. Um, there are more and more offerings showing up in the FedRAMP marketplace. So you can go to the FedRAMP marketplace, and there are, I want to say, 4 call center as a service offerings up there now. Some of them are embedded in like ServiceNow and Salesforce, but then there are some that are pure call center as a service play. And because they're FedRAMP, they have their own encryption, which passes muster, that sort of thing. But you still, you want to set up your VPN to go into your corporate jewel box. You don't want that sitting out in the open, and you want to couple that with a good multi-factor authentication scheme. And of course, everybody has the buzzwords behind them, the zero trust, and okay, yeah, we got that. Um, but it is getting easier. It really is. We get back to the issue with the program offices that sometimes they're like, oh, if impact level 2 is good, impact level 4 is gooder. Um, yeah, but now you've taken your product suite from 5 down to 2, maybe. And I'm making that up. I really haven't looked into the call center stuff for IL4.
yeah,
Uh, but it's the program office can secure themselves out of some real competition really quickly. But to get back to your original question, I do think it's getting easier. I think that a lot of vendors out there, and I don't care what the as a service is, they're understanding it, they're getting it, that if you're not playing secure, you're not playing. And that's not just for the federal government anymore. I mean, you look at states, we now have state ramp that a lot of folks don't understand or don't even know about, that individual states are pulling down the FedRAMP requirements, and they're saying, okay, if you want to be a cloud service provider, or if you want to use cloud services and supply them to the state or the Commonwealth or the Republic, um, then they've got to be state ramp ATO'd. And that, I think, is showing a real commitment. Now, we can argue all day about whether it's effective or not, but in the end, the effectiveness of your security program starts with the person. I'm getting off topic here, but
nope,
starts with the person with their fingers on the keyboard.
yeah.
If you
Well,
can't conquer that, you're done.
and I think that's an important topic, in and of itself, because at the end of the day, that is the primary, statistically, that is the greatest likelihood of a breach. It's coming
Mhm.
from the keyboard user. So, What's your approach there? What's your advice? What are your lessons learned? Where are where's your head on how to help the keyboard user do a better job of keeping things secure?
I think it comes from I'm a very big proponent of servant leadership. And a component of that is, the boss comes in and says, you will do this, you won't do this. A leader comes in and says, you will do this, you won't do this, but here's why. And here is how you get around those challenges, right? And my favorite example is complex passwords. We all know that the more complex the password, the better it is. But then also the more complex the password, the more sticky notes you find underneath somebody's laptop. And I've joked with folks that I'm going to manufacture a keyboard that you turn it over and there's a chunk of whiteboard tape there, and you could just take a erasable marker and write your passwords on it, because that's what people do anyway. So what I do is we have right now, we have a quarterly all hands stand up, and let's face it, your employee base really doesn't care that yesterday or over the past month, your ISP thwarted 3,224 breach attempts, right? That's just not it. Even though their cameras aren't on, you can see their eyes glaze over. What do they want to know? They want to know things that impact them. So getting back to passwords, I was like, look, folks, here's how you have a complex password that's easy to remember. Take your favorite song title, Stairway to Heaven. First, capitalize each word, put a period in between each word, and then even if it's obvious, make the character changes, turn the E's into a 3, turn the A's into the @ sign. But then at the end, after your last period, put in a 3-digit random number. And you've got a really strong, very rememberable password, right? And off you go. And that way you don't have, sticky notes all over the place. The other thing I like to do at our quarterly stand-ups is I like to do news you can use. So something that is not only good for the folks at work, but also the folks, when they go home. I did a presentation on QR codes, and it was very quickly pointed out to me that you can barely go to a restaurant anymore these days and not have to use a QR code. So, you've got that push and pull going on there. Another one that I talked about was, you get a piece of email from Bank of America. Really look at that email address, because there was a phishing campaign, and I believe it was Bank of America. It could have been somebody else, but the phishers took one of the A's, one of the lowercase A's, and replaced it with a Cyrillic character that looks exactly like a Western alphabet small a. And they caught people. They caught people like crazy. And that, I think, is something that folks don't realize. We're all used to, or we got used to, and this was part of the education that I have with our employees, is we got used to a phishing email came in, and it was painfully obvious. It was like, okay, a third grader wrote this with a crayon at their restaurant with the paper placemats.
Yeah.
Well, now, I mean, they're pulling down logos. They're running it through AI. They're getting, excuse me, I'm sorry. They're running it through AI. They're getting all of their grammar checked. They're getting all their spelling checked. And it can get really hard. So, again, news you can use. You get something from your bank and it says, click here. No, you go to how you get to your bank normally. You go to the link that's on your PC that you saved, or your app or whatever, and that's where you go and get it. Don't click on that link.
Yep.
Right? Even though it looks great. No, don't do it. You got other ways to do it.
That's right. No, sound advice. Yeah, it's a real challenge. I mean, the whole push and pull, as you called it, I think having to combat the bad guys, cybersecurity or security in general, it's a process. As we get better and they get better and we get better, and right. I mean, you're right. A few years ago, it was so easy to spot it because it was just obviously bad, right? The English
Mm-hmm.
was bad, easy. But today it's a whole nother ball game where they are using AI. They've gotten really good. So we have to get really good. And so using AI, using the right tools, teaching people how to use them. And I think thankfully people are taking security seriously because they see that it affects the entire organization. It's an important piece, and nobody wants to be responsible for something bad happening. I mean, and then at the same time, the cyber guys have to be doing a good enough job to help the keyboard user, with the right tools to where if they make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. There should be enough layers of defense in there to where it's like, oh, you screwed up and that could have been bad. Thankfully, we caught it because of this and that. But you don't want to rely on that second layer or that third layer, because sometimes they line up and
Mm-hmm.
and the bullet goes straight through, and it's a kill shot, and you don't want that, right? So
Right.
yeah, so it's an interesting time.
Just to follow up on that real quick and on the education stuff, it is also very important for your cyber leaders to not pounce somebody when they do something incorrectly. I'm not going to say wrong or anything else, as
Right.
long as it's not malicious, right? We had, again, a couple lifetimes ago, there was an incident where the individual sent the wrong form, the wrong whatever it was, to the wrong person. And they immediately came to our cyber team and said, okay, I did this. And instead of just, jumping this guy, we're like, okay, good. You reported it. How long ago did it happen? Only 5 minutes ago? Great. Here's what we have to do. Because I'm telling you right now, if somebody makes a mistake and they come to you in good faith and you jump their stuff, you are never going to see them again.
Yep. No, so true. I think that's really, I think we've come a long way. There's still room for improvement, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but I think that's really sound advice that those, and I'd say even beyond the cyber leaders, even the lower down, when that technician gets word, they need to be understanding and supportive and
Mhm.
appreciative of the heads up. Like, oh, that's great. Now we've got a head start. We know where to start. We don't have to wait for something bad to happen. We can start moving now. So
Right, right.
no, that's fantastic. Well, I do like to ask, a lot of our guests, for those people just coming into IT, or thinking about it, what advice would you give them?
Oh my goodness. Threat hunting. Get into threat hunting. And I'm going to give out another resource. I'm sure everybody already knows it, but the SANS Institute. And there was another resource, and I'm sorry, I am unprepared. There was, I thought it was SANS, but there was a place you could go that you logged into a virtual machine and you were presented with actual threat data. And you could sit there. It was a perfectly safe sandbox. You could sit there and you could manipulate it. You could follow all the leads and everything else. And it was just a playground. It was absolutely free. I wish I had taken the time to look it up for you, but I'm in the middle of a proposal, so time is short.
No worries.
But there's that SANS Institute, again, is great for threat hunting, but we have such a dearth of folks because they hear about it. They're like, oh, you have to sift through data. Oh, geez, who wants to do that? But at the same time, if you're into puzzles, if you're into puzzle-based computer games, if you're into anything like that, and you're a youngster getting into the field, go for it. I mean, just at least look at it. And then there's just the plain old field of cybersecurity, the basic blocking and tackling. I heard a very depressing statistic at one of the conferences I went to, that for every one of us good guys, and this is a couple years ago, there are 1,000 bad guys. And it has only gone up. And when you think about it, I would encourage your listeners to look into, or maybe not look into, wow, this could be dangerous, how lucrative cybercrime is.
Oh yeah.
I was at an ISACA conference, and this guy puts up one slide and he says, look at this, for a $1,500 investment, you can make $2.5 million. Yep. And sleep at night. You just walk away from it, and it just happens. So yeah, getting into cybersecurity at any level, getting into threat hunting. And I'm going to make a little bit more of a pitch here for that. Threat hunting, especially, I'm going to talk to the parents out there. You know, every time I go to a SANS threat hunting summit or a threat hunting conference, they always have a segment on folks who are neurodivergent or, along those lines, and how their thought patterns are so incredibly important to threat hunting. I remember just 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, there was a big push to get women into just IT, just into cybersecurity, because they think differently, and it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. We need that diverse talent. So I guess to directly answer your question, threat hunting, cybersecurity, those two fields, we have, and I don't care if it's private sector or government sector. I really don't care. You know, a lot of people, they kind of look sideways at the government sector, the actual government employees, and say, yeah, do they really know what they're doing? No, they do. I work with govies, as I call them, and they call themselves that, so I'm okay there. I work with them sometimes on a daily basis, and they know their stuff. Yeah. So, you've got some good pathways there. And especially with Space Force, and especially with the Air Force, I think the Air Force still has the Cyber Command. Or I think all the branches have a Cyber Command. So if you have somebody who wants to be in uniformed service, but also wants to do threat hunting and cybersecurity, there are a lot of pathways there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, because they will take somebody right off the street with zero background, and you get great training. And then it's a good way to get in without having to, let's say go to school for it, or, ante up the money to learn it, from some online education or whatever it might be. The military's a nice spot for that. So good point. Excellent. Rich, this has been an absolute blast and a pleasure. But before we head out, can you tell people where they can find out more about you and more about Zeiders?
So to learn more about Zeiders, you just go to Zeiders.com. I would like to put a plug in there for our talent community. If you are into quality of life services, if you're a counselor, a coach, or an advisor, or a government contractor program manager, I would really encourage you to go ahead and put your information in there, because that's where we look first when we are starting to bid new work. As for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm really not that exciting. But that's where I hang out. I would love to tell you that I've got a massive presence on Reddit or something like that. I don't. I just don't have the time for that. But see me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to dispense advice, whether it's good or not. That's up to you. That's it. That's where you can find me.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Rich. Until next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.